What are some dark psychology facts you know? This example of Kevin, a random normal guy who claimed to have lost all impulse control after a brain surgery and eventually was arrested for downloading CP in 2006. That's an interesting case, because there has been some debate recently on if the brain surgery was just being used as an excuse to try and wiggle out of serious jail time, and the doctor involved saw it as an opportunity to get funding for researchers. Obviously, we will never know for sure if he really did lose control, or if the whole story was just made up to avoid jail time. And the story is a rabbit hole that very quickly becomes hard to find solid facts in. A depressed psychologist decided to study depression in animals. He created an experiment called the Pit of Despair. Baby monkeys who had bonded with their mothers, or put into a lightless steel cage with sloping sides, so they couldn't easily move or entertain themselves. They were fed and watered remotely, so they didn't even interact with the researchers. Within days, they stopped moving completely. Some were alone in the dark for up to a year. Several starved themselves to death when reintroduced to other monkeys. They couldn't function and were bullied at, incapable of simple relations, to see what sort of mothers they would be. He made a monkey-ape setup, because artificial insemination hadn't been invented. The monkeys subjected to this were very cruel beyond imagining. One sat on its child's head and chewed its limbs off. Every monkey subjected to this was broken. And this research went on for decades. It produced no new scientific value, beyond being an example of why researchers need ethical review of their work. Terrible, it's pretty dark how well propaganda works, and how we are constantly surrounded by it. Our beliefs and behaviors are manipulated by PR firms for huge corporations, and there is nothing that we can do about it. The only reliable and reoccurring measures of happiness are natural predisposition, advancement of goals, improvement in circumstances. Everything else tends to either fall under one of these categories or be a blip in measurement. So yes, some people are just happier than others, and that's it. Also, no matter how good things get, everyone will always want more. This makes a certain amount of sense. If we were psychologically programmed to be happy when we had enough, then the caveman, with warm caves and enough to eat, would have just stopped there and never tried rolling around the round stones. In 2014, conservationist Damian Espinal attempted to reintroduce a family of gorillas to a wildlife reserve. He transported the gorillas to a river, island, and the reserve for them to get used to the area, and then when they were ready, provided them with a bridge to access the main body of the reserve. Near the bridge nested a silverback gorilla named Wumanga, who had no partner or children. Nearby was another silverback with a large family of several wives and 20 or more children. Both of these are unusual. Gorillas normally divide mates between them. Espinal thought that Wumanga might attempt to peel off some of the female gorillas from the newly introduced family on the island, which would be a good thing. Instead, by Espinal's account, Wumanga crossed the bridge and beat the newly arrived female gorilla's death, dumping the bodies in the jungle and seriously battering the male of the group. This is not supposed to be a thing that gorillas do. Ever, there are multiple theories about what actually happened, and Espinal later admitted that they were never completely sure about what had happened. But if this is actually true, then Wumanga might just become the first non-human incel serial killer. And if there's a natural precedent for that to happen, that puts it in a hugely different light. A classic would be Milgram's experiments, proving a lot of people would administer fatal electric shocks to others just because an authority figure instructs them to. There has been some criticism of his research, but the basic outcome could be replicated. I don't really know if it's psychology fact, but the whole troubled teen industry that exists to abuse kids. Many kids have died in the care of these schools through restraint and physical abuse, starvation and medical neglect, and some other things. Others were tormented, but in wild, weird ways that sound so unbelievable that the schools were allowed to stay open, because who'd believe that a place meant to help troubled and mentally ill kids would force them into boxing rings, starve them, assault them, make them dig their own graves and lay in them, telling them that's where they'd end up without the school's help. Just to name a few, these schools aren't even usually run or staffed by people who have any education or experience working with kids or mental illnesses. But they're still allowed to exist. Some are getting better or being shut down, now that people who went or worked in these places are speaking out. But others are still existing and actively harming kids. And it's terrifying to me. It is actually quite easy to condition children to not succeed at a very young age, simply by ignoring or slandering any success, or original thinking that they might have. They did experiments with fleas where they put them in different sized jars. Normally a flea can jump about 6 feet high. It's about the equivalent of a man jumping over the Empire State Building. They raised them after they were born, and they jumped and hit the lid. And after a while, when they were let out, they only jumped as high as the lid. And they also passed this genetic trait down. I'm a little late to this thread, so I don't know if this was posted. In the discovery and subsequent study of learned helplessness, researchers would shock dogs in metal cages repeatedly with no escape. Once the dogs started laying down during the shocks, the researchers would open the cage doors, and the dogs would stay in during the shocks laying down. They concluded that people could learn to feel helpless, even when provided a chance to escape or alleviate suffering. During repeat studies, new researchers found that the animals were not laying down due to helplessness, but because when you increase the surface area of a shock, it reduces the pain. There are narcissists and there are damned narcissists. The difference being, a narcissist has attained some level of achievement and/or success. A damned narcissist is one who's never reached any level of success, yet through revisionist history, gaslighting, and overwhelming need to elevate themselves above everyone, ad nauseum to stupefy everyone with fabrication. How am I an expert on this subject? My father is the latter. 60 years of this behavior has conditioned me to spot the narcissist superior. This year there was some big drama about 2006 Alzheimer's research being almost definitely fabricated. And it's easy to make a whole story about how our view of Alzheimer's has been built on lie for 15 years. And yeah, a lot of time probably got wasted on doctored reports. That said, what I think is even darker is that scientific studies, on the whole, are usually wrong, especially psychology, as it's more rapidly developing. A lot of people, I imagine, are not really stunned to hear that whatever research from whatever year is fake, because the same happens even when intentions are good. It's really easy for bias to affect data, and in science, there is so much force from publications to get interesting results. Their researchers are essentially duped into faking results without explicitly intending it. The brain is the human's greatest strength and our greatest weakness. It is terrifying what the mind can do to someone. In a basic sense, it can twist your perception of reality, which can make daily life extremely hard for some people. I'm not sure about the validity of this one, but it's interesting at least. Every feeling you experience as a human that indicates a need has an often subconscious corresponding action in order to remove or otherwise treat the feeling and achieve homeostasis. Hungry, eat, you're not hungry anymore. Horny, have sex, you're not horny anymore. Sad, try, you're not sad anymore. Now, have you ever seen something extremely cute, almost to the point of getting somewhat frustrated along with an urge to squeeze it? Some think that this urge to squeeze something cute, like a kitten or baby, is really the subconscious urge to kill it, because then it stops being cute. This may also be related to the theory that dogs really enjoy admirable squeaky toys, because it replicates the sound of small animals dying. Fun, right, when babies crawl a certain way, like push with one foot and curl the other leg up. They were more likely to develop schizophrenia later in life. The folks who did the study came to my work, and we were all a little shocked. If you want to be confident and want to tell someone something, have them sit down as you are standing up or catch them sitting down. Tired of the ranting Karen, stare at her mouth and say, You got something in your teeth. Nervous during an interview, so much so that you can't look at the interviewer. Look at the bridge of their nose and keep your back straight. It gives confidence. Want to know if someone is watching you pretend to yawn and look their way. If they yawn back, then they were looking at you. The easiest hack is yourself. Calling yourself an empath is a form of narcissism. It is a form of grandiose thinking and superiority. Self-named empaths tend to take the moral high ground. We all possess the ability to empathize and have compassion. It is how we are wired. Even serial killers, sociopaths, and psychopaths display empathy and acts of compassion. To some degree, it is just underdeveloped or a choice to limit the empathy response. Someone who feels others suffering deeply has a highly developed empathic state, but there really is no such thing as an empath. The thing people consider normal, like eye contact, can be used to manipulate people. Look up the narcissistic stare. But people have more of a problem with people who make less eye contact. So I don't know where it goes from there. It can also indicate underlying disorders such as ADHD, Asperger's disease, or depression. People who don't socialize much might become clueless of the intense effect eye contact has. Some people have been conditioned into not showing weakness that won't try to hide their insecurities by engaging in firm eye contact, but due to strong internal sense of fear or anxiety, they become numb or deaf to more subtle emotional cues indicating that they're making too much eye contact. I take narcissistic stare with a grain of salt. Here are some facts about dark psychology that you might find informative. 1. Dark psychology refers to the study and application of manipulative and coercive techniques to influence and control others. 2. Gaslighting is a common technique used in dark psychology to make someone doubt their own sanity or perception of reality. 3. Psychopaths and sociopaths often exhibit traits of dark psychology, such as lack of empathy, charm, and more manipulation skills. 4. Cults and extremist groups often use dark psychology tactics to control their followers. 5. Brainwashing is a method of using psychological techniques to alter an individual's beliefs, values, and behavior to conform to a particular ideology. 6. Many con artists and fraudsters use dark psychology tactics, such as deception and manipulation, to scam people out of their money. 7. Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological condition where hostages develop feelings of affection or sympathy towards their captors. 8. The Milgram experiment showed that people are willing to inflict pain on others if they are told to do so by an authority figure. Freud, although being the grandfather of psychology, believed most things were sexually driven. He believed we were born with a sex drive, and it became stunted after your first year, until it awakened again later in life through puberty. He used it to explain everything. A prime example of it is if you chew your nails. He claimed it was an oral fixation from either a lack of or overstimulation of use of a pacifier when you were a baby. He also believed we used our parents as the prime example of a pair, so we look for traits we see in them. In a significant other, calling it makes you think you can always be right, and eliminate calling it incorrectly. It's impossible to call something without thinking of all the times you were wrong. It encourages cheating and being mean or preventing anyone else from calling it, so you can be right the most number of times. It's known in real psychology, but they call it something different, along the lines of confirmation bias. It brings out the worst character traits in people. I'm not sure what it's called, and I can't find it, but it's dark arts of psychology. Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment is pretty messed up. He basically placed some students under the role of prisoner or guard, and had the prisoners placed in a mock prison underneath the Stanford University psychology department. The students' aim was to test how easily average people would conform to societal roles provided to them. Within days, the guards began to abuse and basically torture the prisoners, despite it being a simple experiment. Zimbardo himself took the role of the prison superintendent and actually convinced prisoners to stay, even when they asked to leave, because he becomes so engrossed in his role. Eventually, the study had to be stopped early by Zimbardo's future wife, because of just how sadistic the guards had become towards the prisoners. What scares me most about this is just how easy it is for normal people to turn into sadistic and violent individuals, simply because they have a little authority to look up to. Luckily, the prisoners seem to not suffer any long-term effects from their ordeal. What's interesting is Zimbardo actually used the study to explain the atrocities committed in Abu Ghraib. Though it still didn't justify what the guards did, you can have an acute psychotic break at any time. Most people who are psychopaths don't end up serial killers. They are the ones who scam, con, deal, and harm others with little to no regard to the people they victimized. They view negative consequences as inconveniences as opposed to an actual punishment. If you tell someone they have a curse on them, they will think about that fact often. You plan to seed in their mind that will focus their subconscious on negative events and make them more superstitious. Their subconscious will retroactively make the curse real. On August 1st, 1966, after stabbing his mother and his wife to death the previous night, Charles Whitman, a Marine veteran, took rifles and other weapons to the observation deck atop the main building tower at the University of Texas at Austin, and then opened fire indiscriminately on people in the surrounding campus and streets. Over the next 96 minutes, he shot and killed 15 people, including an unborn child, and injured 31 other people. The incident ended when 2 policemen and a civilian reached Whitman and fatally shot him at Whitman's violent impulses, with which he had been struggling for several years, were likely caused by a tumor found in the white matter above his amygdala upon autopsy. I personally find the backfire effect disturbing. Essentially, a person can be presented with overwhelming evidence disputing a closely held belief, and instead of changing their position, they double down on the belief and can become even hostile towards the educator. This is largely because the human brain associates its identity with its largely flawed understanding of the world, and any information that challenges that understanding, and by proxy their identity, is viewed as an attack on the person, potentially resulting in a fight, flight, and freeze response. We are still unsure how to effectively work around this en masse. I think the expression goes, we're only 7 meals away from anarchy as long as our needs are met. We're normally somewhat behaved, but in all of us, animalistic survival mode still exists. If our daily needs are threatened, every single one of us, has evil and carnage in us to survive. When you're younger, or at least when I was, most people would mock me and be like, oh, are you going to analyze me? Now people treat me with a lot more respect and frequently value my opinion. It's an area where the issues are insanely complex, as are people, which some people don't seem to realize. There are dark sides, but they do tend to depend on your specific area of study. And psychology. Social psychology is famous for having some bad actors, for example. However, intentionally or not, they ultimately made people question themselves enough to make a change for the better. I live by a well-known high-security hospital in the UK. It housed a lot of bad people, like the sickest of the sick. I have worked in the care sector for over 20 years and like to think that I know my stuff. I am also empathetic enough to care for patients who have issues and are violent, etc. I once said to a friend who was doing placement there, training in psychology, about applying to work at the hospital, and he told me outright not to do it. He said that it would ruin me and that the patients, they are capable of manipulating you without you even knowing it. I thought I'd enjoy the challenge, but he said it's hard to turn it off when you get home, because you see and hear things that will mess with your head. I still think about applying now, but not sure it's worth the risk. If somebody has a coolish demeanor, I can say they're somewhat cool, and I don't think it changes the perception of that person. I described, but coal is a really, really harsh word. And psychological studies say that if you describe someone with several attributes, among them either warm or cold, the cold makes people seem way more sinister, calculating, etc. So I think if someone is sinister and calculating, I make sure to add in cold every time I describe them to others. Gaslighting, to me, there's not much worse than convincing someone that their reality is not their reality. Gaslighting is something I would never do to someone. Even my worst enemy. For example, you're cheating on someone, but you constantly tell them you're not, and they're crazy. It might not sound bad, but oh, it really is. They start to think they're going crazy. Just Google gaslighting. The placebo and nocebo effect. The placebo is where you could tell somebody that this certain air freshener relieves anxiety. And the nocebo effect is where you can tell somebody you just gave them drugs, and they will start acting like they're on drugs. How people who feel more lonely are more likely to be involved in cults or gangs, not only to feel wanted, but to know that they are a part of something. A lot of people ask why people join gang us in the first place. But just imagine you're alone. No family or anyone to even look after you. And this group comes up to you and says, "Hey, if you join us, we'll take care of you." Our brains begin making decisions. Before we become aware of it, every choice we make, it gets pondered and decided neurochemically before our conscious mind processes the information. What we believe is a real-time choice is actually a delayed conscious realization of unconscious determination. Brings a hell of a Pandora's box element to free will. Phantom pregnancies astonish me. That a woman can think in her head so much that she is pregnant that it has physical effects on her body, like stopping her period and even making her belly grow.